So I really feel sorry for the Russian people. Here it is, Friday, the 14th of June. I really feel sorry for Russia, the people. You know, they're a strong people. They have some incredibly beautiful cities, incredibly beautiful traditions and songs and dances. They have tremendous space. But, oh my gracious, it's getting harder and harder to not to compare Putin to Hitler, really. The biggest difference is that Putin doesn't have death camps and gas chambers. That's really the biggest difference. But, you know, all of his premises for invading Ukraine have been false. First, he said, you know, we attacked, you know, it's hard to forget, hard to remember the exact sequence of events, sequence of claims. But the initial one, I think, was to denazify Ukraine. Okay, that's not a bad idea. If it were true. Yeah, there might be some crazy people that go around with the Nazi salute and Nazi symbols, but that were not part of the government. And again, remember when somebody asked a government official in Russia, what do you describe as a Nazi government? And the answer was, any government that doesn't look like ours. Which means basically every country in the world has a Nazi government except Russia. Imagine that. The whole world is Nazi, just not Russia. Imagine that. So that was the Nazi thing. And then they needed to demilitarize Ukraine because it presented an existential threat to Russia. Well, let me put it this way. When Russia attacked Ukraine because of Ukraine's existential threat to Russia, did they encounter tank formations getting ready to cross the border to attack Ukraine? Did they encounter jets on airfields armed with bombs and missiles getting ready to attack Russia? Or did they encounter soldiers in defensive trenches and behind barricades throwing Molotov cocktails? Does any of that indicate an existential threat to Russia? Really? Then they said, then another claim was, well, they're our brothers. You know, they should be in our house. Well, let me put it this way. A family has two brothers. One brother, and when he grows up, stays at home with the parents, and the other brother stays next door in a different house. Does the brother that stayed home have a right to attack the other brother because he doesn't live in the same house as he does? Does that make any sense? Another claim was that Ukraine was filled with Satan worshipers. There's no truth to that. Now remember, there's a lot of free press in the world, a lot. And especially, you know, Europe is swarming with journalists, just almost assuredly, you know, biting at the chance to prove something dramatic so that they can make a name for themselves. But did any of them go in there and say, oh, hey, I saw the Ukraine's getting ready to attack Russia? Nope, that didn't happen. Oh, I want to expose all the Nazis in the Ukrainian government. Did any of that happen? No. Did anybody say, hey, I found out that there's a lot of Satanists in Ukraine and I want to put it on the paper? Did any of that happen? No. You know, all these claims are just false. And yes, it is true that Ukraine took some steps against the Russian Orthodox clergy in Ukraine, but they were proven to be spies for Russia. Okay? And yes, it is true that there are Russian people living in Ukraine because of the long period where Russia conquered and swallowed up other lands. Okay? You gotta bear in mind, the borders swung back and forth for centuries, right? But at a certain point, the borders were solidified by the Westphalia Treaty, you know? So, you know, there's a lot of Germans living in, way back when, there were big pockets of Germans living in the United States. So, did Germany have any claim to those lands because there's Germans living on it? No. At one time, I guess because of the famines in Ireland, there were big pockets of Irish in the United States. Does that give Ireland a claim to those lands? No. There's a lot of Somalis, I believe, living in Minnesota, maybe. You know, does that mean Somalia has a claim to those lands because there's Somalis living on them? No. So, you know, if the Russians in Ukraine want to be with other Russians, well, they can either stay. If Russia wants those Russians living in Ukraine to be back in Russia, well, then they should move them, which is against human rights, because people have a right to live where they are. That's a basic human right. You can't just move people around. Kind of like how they stole so many thousands of children so that they could erase any knowledge of their Ukrainian heritage, and they can grow up to be Russians and probably grow up to fight other countries. All because Russia has such a low birth rate. Imagine that. We're such a lousy country that we're not having children. So, what can we do about that? Oh, we'll steal other countries' children. We'll bring them here, tell them how bad their other country was, you know, brainwash them. Then we'll raise them to be as our own. They'll be Russians now. Isn't that sick? That is absolutely sick. Now, the latest thing, Russia wants to ceasefire, wants Zelensky to agree to a ceasefire if Zelensky yields the territories not only yielded by Russia already because of their illegal, unprovoked invasion, but also areas that the Russians haven't even been in. Can you imagine that? It's kind of like a thief that stole half your house, you know, all your good inside, says, I'll let you agree not to prosecute me if you let me keep everything I stole. Really? Really? And again, all these claims that the West and NATO wants to destroy Russia, that is not true. Absolutely not true. How would that even look? Really? How would that look? All anybody wants is that Russia leave Ukraine. Wherever it invaded in February of 22, they go. Plus, the area they invaded in 2014, Crimea. All right. Why did they have to come in with tanks if there was any legitimacy to it? Really? Can you imagine? if Why'd they have to come in tanks? Okay. And again, once again, and I don't know too much about that. I heard it was they took over Crimea without firing a shot. I don't know if that's true. It might be because it was unexpected. Putin had just hosted the Olympics. Everything was peace. Everybody was happy. Blah, happy. The Olympics, everything was great. And I believe it was the next day that the tanks rolled into Crimea. That was pretty sad. That was really, really sad. Nobody knew that was coming. So anyway, back to destroying Russia. That's impossible. Absolutely impossible. So all they want to do is get Russia out of Ukraine. If that would happen, all the sanctions would stop. All the assets would get unfrozen. Russia would be able to stop expanding cemeteries. The incredible loss of 530,000 Russians, that whole increasing tragedy would stop. The Russian economy could transition from a war economy back to an economy that supports the needs of its civilian population. So this is just bad all around. Bad all around. It's crazy.